But really what I was doing is I said, I believe things about the future of the world, and I was going to build products and services to do it. The thing is, to do that, you don't have to be 20. You don't have to sleep under your desk, right? You don't have to go raise money from a venture capitalist. In fact, every one of your companies, when they started, were a startup, right? Now maybe that was a long time ago in some of those companies, and maybe that was like just a couple years in other ones, but like the cool thing about companies is they all start as startups. It's sort of like one of these rules, like all companies have people working, right? So, so that's what I mean. And we spent a lot of time at CMU. One of the things that I've spent a lot of time working at CMU is trying to figure out how we can actually teach entrepreneurship, because there's this great debate in higher ed, which is, are entrepreneurs born or are they taught, right? And it's a fun debate, because if entrepreneurs are just born, it basically means that I'm wasting my time, right? Because like, what am I doing on campus? Like, if it's just some innate thing that entrepreneurs are just kind of born with, then it's just a waste of time. The challenge that I have is, like, I think it's a fun conceptual debate, and believe me, in the ivory towers of academia, we love to have it, and you know, you're welcome to stop by any time. That conversation will probably be going on somewhere in the hallowed halls of Carnegie Mellon. But here's the thing that I always remind people: no matter what you believe philosophically, I can tell you experientially that I have students who come into my class with zero desire to be an entrepreneur, 7 to 14 weeks later, are all in on this career and are doing amazing things over those 7 weeks. So I can tell you that you know, I may not be as smart as some of the psychology professors who can debate this kind of intellectually, but I can tell you experientially, you absolutely can do this. And so one of the things I did with two of my colleagues at CMU over the last 6 months, this is actually not published research yet, but it will be shortly. We went out and we talked to 200 different entrepreneurship programs across the country. And we talked to them about how they teach entrepreneurship. We talked to them about what works and what doesn't. We also talked to them about how their perception has changed on campus. And this is probably not surprising in sort of directionally what this says, but it's kind of amazing that this many professors agreed about anything. So the question is, over the last 2 years, you know, what's your interest in entrepreneurship? And you can see that almost 85% are in the significantly increased. So there's more interest in entrepreneurship today than 2 years ago. 85% of the campuses we talked to. Another 11% has stayed the same, right? 95% of professors have not agreed on something ever. Like they're actually, that will be the most amazing part when this gets published. And then we started talking to them maybe about a more interesting question for this conversation, right? So lots of people are now picking graduate schools based on the quality of the entrepreneurship program. Students really want exposure to this, whether they're going to be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. And then we said, like, well, how do you do it? And like, what works and what doesn't work? And we came up with 3 things, like 3 sort of meta approaches to teaching entrepreneurship. And the reason this is relevant for you is not because you probably care how we teach entrepreneurship in graduate schools, but these are the same 3 things. If you want to make your organization more entrepreneurial, or help more of your sales teams be entrepreneurial, these are the 3 things I think that you can do. Just replace students with employees, right? So the first thing that you can do is you can expose them to models that say, hey, these are the best practices and the processes that people who do entrepreneurship well tend to do more than those who don't. Right? So entrepreneurship, it starts where they work out. These are the best practices they tend to follow. These are the ones that they don't tend to follow, right? And then, and this is, the second bullet is super important, and it's what I think drives some of my colleagues in other parts of the school crazy. The important thing is that you don't teach them that and then test them on how well they learn that process. You teach them that, and then you test them on how well they apply that process, right? So every week, we're saying, here's what great startups do, and then over the next week, go do that, right? And whether that's true, whether I'm teaching in an MBA course or I'm teaching a bunch of computer science students, right? It's like, this is what good entrepreneurs do. This is what good entrepreneurs don't do. Now, please go do some of the things that good entrepreneurs do this week. And then let's come back next week and talk about how that worked. We'll learn together as a group, and then I'll teach you more things that good entrepreneurs do and don't do. And so as it relates to maybe helping your teams be more entrepreneurial, right? You just giving them a book or delivering a PowerPoint to them without a chance to experientially apply that immediately, I can tell you will be a fun experience for them. It'll be a lot like when you went to camp as a kid. It'll be a fun thing for them. But if you don't give them a chance to experience it, like the next week, it won't stick. But if you do give them a chance to experience it the next week, it's amazing how over a couple weeks, like you can absolutely see these companies change. It's not in the media space, but I spent a bunch of time with a large automotive part supplier over the last 6 months, and I'm telling you, like they're in Chicago. Like I can tell you, when I first finished spending time with them, like I thought, well, this might be the example that entrepreneurs are born, not taught. I just wasn't sure I was going to work out. But over 6 months, these guys are absolutely incredible. And there's all kinds of challenges, right? Because you know the automotive industry, like they're not even tier 1 suppliers, so there's all kinds of channels and things like that. But we've given them all these chances to go learn something, apply it. Learn something, apply it. And I mean, it's a different company when you walk through the door 6 months later. And it's a different company from a financial metrics perspective, which is obviously important. You know, nobody feeds their kids or pays for their kids' colleges based on like a nice cultural feel. It's a wonderful benefit, but like it's also just a financially different company. They're getting deals that they wouldn't have gotten before. The teams are more collaborative. Like it's really amazing. And then I think the third thing that's really important, and you can't underestimate, is you can expose them to people who have done what they want to do, right? And so in an entrepreneurship setting, trying to teach people startups, right? That means exposing them to people who have done startups. I think in your world, it's like, hey, can you expose them to people who've done the same things you imagine your media organization doing in more of an entrepreneurial way, right? So that's how you teach entrepreneurship. And the good news is that we've gotten way better at teaching entrepreneurship over the last decade. And I think this is really good news because, and this is something I said long before anything about the current political environment we live in, but I think we can all agree, no matter how you feel, like the world could be a lot better than it is, and so more entrepreneurs creating more businesses that make the world the way it ought to be, and more people being entrepreneurial inside. Like it's good that we're doing better at teaching people to be entrepreneurial. Yes.
How do you account for like individuals' aversion to risk?
Yeah.
Like I know 5 people who passed on jobs at Google because
right.
it was risky because
Sure.
Yahoo had done search. And like, how do you? I mean, that's a factor, right? In terms
so to me, actually, this is why I'm increasingly. So the question was, how do you account for individual risk? So his example was he knew 5 people who passed on an opportunity to join Google in the early days because Yahoo at that point kind of owned search, and it was a very risky thing to join that company. To me, this is actually why I've gone from really skeptical about this entrepreneurship thing to really excited about this entrepreneurship thing. Because actually, the way I think about it is that everybody, I believe, wants to make the world the way it ought to be, right? And everybody could do their job better if they apply this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. But where to do it, I think, is 100% a function of what you're talking about, right? And so I do think it makes sense for my grad students, many of them, because they're single, many of them are relatively debt-free, and they're used to living on ramen noodles. For many of them, it makes sense to like continue that lifestyle for another year or two and have this potential dramatic asymmetric change in their net worth, but also career, all that stuff. Some of them, for reasons that doesn't make sense, right? And so for some of them, they're like, look, I need somebody to, so there's a bunch of things that put people in different spectrums. And certainly, as I started doing more and more of this executive education, right, I think most people at a different point in life have a different sort of risk-adjusted return profile. And so I think being an entrepreneur is a great way to do this stuff with more safety around it. I will say that, I do think, and we don't have time to get into all of this in the next hour, but I do think there are things that, if you're really committed to doing that for your companies, are things you can do top down as well in terms of how you think about failure in your organization. So if people go take these risks, how do you reward them on that? How do you make it safe to fail? And from a financial perspective, how do you do enough of these that your business can be successful even if 4 of the 5 don't work out, because the one that worked out is so successful that it kind of pays back the other 4, which is kind of just taking a portfolio approach to this stuff. It's a longer conversation and probably not one that is super relevant today, but I think if you get committed on this, there are resources I can point you to there. And I think there's a question in the...
Well, I just sort of add on, and I don't want to take you down this path, but curious, so even in startups or entrepreneurial companies, if there is someone who is risk adverse, do you believe, and even though you, like, if it's like sometimes it's inherent that they're risk adverse, but if you even have made it a safe place to fail, do you believe that behavior can change?
Yes, if you've made it a safe place to fail, though, is like a really loaded sentence, right? So, so one of the things that's interesting is, Dan, if you want me to just go, I'll sort of look for you to kind of. Okay. All right. So one of the things that's been really interesting as I've done this with more companies is there's actually a function that I think has way more impact on kind of the cultural change than people suspect, right? So I don't think it'd be surprising to anybody in this room, and I think if you ask most CEOs, they would tell you that everybody in this room is critical to making this happen, right? You've got to make sure that the people who interact with your customers are committed to this sort of different approach to interacting with your customers. I don't think that's surprising at all. The other function, though, that I think is surprising is you've got to get your CFO to buy in. And if he or she doesn't buy into this, right, and I have a whole sort of different way to talk to CFOs about this, right? But if they don't buy into this, it's harder to have what you just said happen, right? For it to be safe to fail. I think you can still take an entrepreneurial approach to how you talk to your customers. You can infuse this sort of entrepreneurial mindset into your teams. They'll have more empathy. They'll probably deliver more creative solutions to their clients that will help you grow your business. But if you really want to do, more disruptive stuff, which is typically kind of step 2 in this maturity model, right? You've got to get the CFO on board as well, and that starts with a bunch of, like most conversations with CFO, a bunch of sort of working through math on spreadsheets so they understand kind of what you're committed to doing. One quick hack on this, and then I'll park this unless there's another question. And like I should say too, by the way, I said this to Dan, like when you're a college professor, you can just talk as long as you want. And so, so I've got a bunch of slides I can talk so long, but if this is interesting to you guys, we can just keep talking on this. Just remember, I'm what's between you and lunch, so we'll cut this whenever you want. But one thing that often is a helpful frame of reference for CFOs is think about how they're managing the corporate treasury and the company's assets, right? They have a whole model that they're using to allocate those resources, right? A large percentage goes to safe investments, but a small percentage goes to guys like what I spend 95% of my time doing, right? Which is investing in early stage startups. And when they invest in me, right, they say, look, this is our risky, part of the asset, and I expect that more than half the investments you make are going to return close to 0, certainly less than the money you invested in them. But I'm all in on that because I know that the other half are going to have some distribution, and the top 2 or 3 investments are going to pay back the whole fund. So I can talk to a CFO as an asset manager, and he loves that. And so what you need to do is you need to remind your CFO of that conversation when you walk in as the business unit, and you say, hey, we've gone through step 1 of this maturity model, right? Our teams now have more empathy. They talk to customers more like partners, less like order takers, and kind of all of that stuff. But then step 2 is like, okay, now we're going to start doing some real disruptive stuff. And the reality is, a lot of that disruptive stuff is not going to work out. right? Like, maybe half of it's not going to work out. Now, there's a bunch of things you can do with the spreadsheet, right? Which is like, we're going to invest it across different phases, and so maybe less than half the dollars won't go to the right stuff. And typically at that point, your CFO will say something like, well, we have a stage gate process, and a good answer to that is awesome. How many of your ideas have actually died at gate 1 or 2? And usually the answer is 0, which means you don't have a stage gate process, you just have a project management process. But sort of walk them through like what we're really talking about here, get them on board, and when you get them on board, you plus them can absolutely change the culture of it. And I think you are in a unique position where you can get step 1 as well, which is you can actually change how your sales force talks to the customers and get some quick wins to actually start this process. Does that make sense? Other questions on that? Because again, I'm happy to keep talking on this as long as, yes, I'm happy to keep talking about this as long as you guys want. So, anything else on that? Okay, cool. So these are two really good books that have kind of changed how we teach entrepreneurship in graduate schools over the last couple of years, and frankly, just how entrepreneurs do startups. So how many of you are familiar with these 2 books? Okay, a couple of you. Yeah, so if not, these are both, this one especially is like buy it in Orlando, and by the time you land at LAX, you finish the book kind of thing. It's a quick read, but it does a really nice job on what in startup vernacular is called idea to product market fit. And the idea is product market fit is this term you hear entrepreneurs use a lot, but it's a great term for you to start using inside your organization as well, because it's not a word that you guys already use and mean something different. Right? So I think in business today, one of the things that's super risky is people use the same word and mean different things. So I thought your talk where you talked about private marketplaces was really helpful, because you could probably have 2 people talking to each other and saying, hey, we really care about private marketplaces, and they leave and they mean 2 very different things. And then when they meet again in 3 months, they're frustrated that they both built different things, right? In startups, this happens all the time. Like, hey, is this a good product idea? Like, what you and I mean by a good product idea are very, very different. Or, hey, are we making progress on that project? What you and I mean by the word progress is very different. But when you can use words that we don't use in everyday language, it becomes really helpful. So that's why you've seen so many of the entrepreneur kind of literature come up with these terms that are sort of outside of our vernacular. So this is the term product market fit. Depending on how old you are, this guy is either the guy that's kind of reinventing venture capital or the guy who invented the web browser. It's an interesting kind of litmus test on your age. You guys can do the test yourself, but Mark kind of originally coined this, and product market fit basically means 2 things. Are you in a good market, and does your product satisfy that market? And here's the thing, every company needs to understand what good means. This is another conversation with your CFO, right? So for some of your businesses, probably $1 million of new revenue next year growing to $5 million is really awesome. For ESPN, that's probably not a good market, right? There are everybody has different definitions of what good is. It's kind of ambiguous, but you kind of together say, okay, what's a good market? And then there are easy things you can do to say, does this satisfy the needs of this market? And then, and then basically you go out and you talk to customers about your product and see if it satisfies the needs of the market. I'm going to skip through these because it's a funny story, but we'll do it real quickly. So this is why I think it's super important to go from idea to product market fit in an efficient way. So after we sold Peak Strategy to Morgan Stanley, that transaction closed and kind of all the stuff wrapped up November 30th, 2006. I got married December 8th, 2006, so my wife did all the wedding planning. And then we went on a honeymoon, and then we came back, and I was like, okay, we're going to do another startup. And I think she said, what? But, we did. All right, so we started our second company called Mspoke, and hired a bunch of engineers. many from the first company, because that's kind of the way serial entrepreneurs work. And we started working on this product called FeedHub. And the idea was that we were going to help people filter their RSS feeds. So remember when RSS readers were super popular? We were going to be kind of the smart filter on your RSS feeds on top of whatever your favorite RSS reader was. And the good thing is that all 10 of us were super committed RSS readers. So it was easy to build the right product because we were the target audience, right? And so we spent 10 months in what we call stealth mode, building this perfect product for our perfect customers. And that was fun, because here's how every day went. We walk into the office, we have a meeting in the morning, talk about what we're going to work on that day. Either myself or one of those 9 engineers, all super brilliant guys, would be like, hey, I think it'd be cool if it could do this. Oh, that is an awesome idea. Let's put it on the board as another thing we can build. And for 10 months, these 10 guys and I basically built this awesome product. And I'm not going to lie, when we went to unveil the product at a tech conference, this is what we were expecting, right? The big concern at the time was like, make sure your phones work, because Larry or Sergey are going to call. We've already told one company this is acquisition number 2. And you laugh, but like that's actually not a joke. That is actually what we were saying to each other at that point. And the good news was that like people absolutely loved it. So we had given a number of tech bloggers and some large tech properties early access to the tool. But when I say early access to the tool, basically we gave them white glove service to make sure they had a great experience. They reciprocated by writing really nice articles about how amazing the service was, and that was awesome. And so we launched. They wrote articles. You guys know how this works. You're in the industry. Because they wrote good articles, other people wrote good articles, and then more people wrote good articles. And next thing you know, there have been, in the first 24 hours, thousands of really good articles about this. But I'm at this conference where I unveiled the product, and about 24 hours in, some of the journalists who we'd given that white glove service to came up to me and they're like, hey, there's a problem. It's not working anymore. And I was like, yeah, that's a problem. So I call back to the office and they're like, oh yeah, the system keeps running out of memory. And this is in 2007, so this is before Amazon cloud computing and stuff. We actually had like physical servers, you might remember, like, right? And so we had to literally restart the servers every 4 hours. And for 2 months, every 4 hours, my CTO restarted the servers. And when he restarted the servers, we forgot what articles we had showed you. And so we might know that you really liked Steelers content, but we wouldn't know if you wanted the information about like yesterday's Steelers game or the Steelers game 2 weeks ago. Or you might really like election content, but we wouldn't know if you want like now election content or election content from 2 months ago. And I mean, you can just think about this, right? Like that might be topically very relevant content for you, but to you it feels like the thing is just broken. And so they all wrote articles about how terrible the service was. And I had this realization in September of 2007, which is that I had been talking to all my entrepreneurs about spending 10 months in stealth mode. But what I'd actually done is I'd wasted 10 months of my life. And that was pretty depressing. But then it got like way more depressing because I realized I hadn't just wasted 10 months of my life, right? I'd also wasted 10 months of these 10 talented engineers' time. So the silver lining, if you will, was that I wasted 100 months of my life and their life. And so that was kind of a dark fall for me. And I was out running one day, really feeling depressed and trying to figure out what I do with this business and how to not fail and to the risk tolerance thing. Now I had a wife and things felt more serious. And I had this thought that like kind of made things a little bit better, which was like, well, I guess it wasn't 100 months of real wasted time because now I know this thing about how people use the system that I didn't know before, because what the problem had been that we didn't really understand how big the set of feeds were that people were consuming. I thought, well, that's good. I learned this thing that was helpful for me continuing to grow the business. But then I had this, and so for like 2 days I felt much, much better. I was like, oh, okay, it wasn't 100 months of total waste of time. I learned this thing. And then one night I had this thought after work. I thought, well, if all I wanted to learn was, you know, how people consume feeds, is there any faster way I could have figured that out? And I realized, like, yeah, in like 6 days I could have just had people email me their feeds, and then that got like way more depressed, right? And so we ended up pivoting that business. We sold it to LinkedIn, as I mentioned. It's, you know, the engine that we had built was pretty awesome, and so it became valuable to help people kind of deliver this relevant content. And when we were selling to LinkedIn, I asked, so this is Reid Hoffman. He's the co-founder and chairman of LinkedIn. He's also a super successful angel investor. He's one of the first investors in Facebook and has made tons of really, is he in Rubicon actually? I don't even know.
No.
Okay, but he's a very, very good early stage, seed stage investor. At the time he was doing more angel investing, now he's out of firm kind of operationalizing it. But as we were selling LinkedIn, or selling Unspoke to LinkedIn, I said, like, well, what do you tell people, like, when you make investments? And he said, this is the advice I give all of them. Launch early enough to be embarrassed by your product's first version. And then he told me the story, which is kind of cool, and he's now told it publicly enough. But when they had the idea for LinkedIn, they actually had the idea for LinkedIn back when they were at PayPal. So Reid was a founding board member and early employee at PayPal, ran business development for them there. And they had this idea for LinkedIn, which is like, well, what if you could see all of your connections? And they had this idea for it, but they were still working on PayPal, so they kind of shelved it for a little bit. And then when they sold PayPal to eBay, he started working on it more seriously. And they had sort of 5 things that they thought they had to build before people could get value from this kind of professional social network, right? So 5 features that they had to build. And they built 4 of the 5 features, and then Reid had this idea, which is like, well, what if we launched it, right? What if we actually started showing it to people and getting their feedback? And of course, you know, you can imagine what happened, right? People flipped out because, like, people, it was so obvious that they would show it to people to be like, well, yeah, great, but why didn't you do the 5th feature before you showed it to me? But so debate ensued, and ultimately they launched the product, because that's what CEOs do. And what was interesting about this was people didn't say, like, hey, the product's great, but how about that 5th feature? Instead, what they said was, hey, product's great, but all these other features, not the 5th feature, could you build all this stuff? And over the next years, they built tons and tons of features, and that 5th feature stayed on the roadmap as something that they might build at some point, but all of these other things were more important. And he said what he realized is, no matter how smart your founding team is, right, and the LinkedIn founding team is like about as good as, like, that's, no matter how smart your founding team is, right, the market in aggregate is smarter about their problems than any founding team is. Now, founders, for what it's worth, and entrepreneurs are smarter about the solutions, right? You know way more about how to deliver the right solutions to your clients than they do. But they're way smarter about the problems they have in their business than you are, right? And if I think back to that, so I think back to that VMware story, right? Like, I think the reason we were able to have that conversation with VMware, going back to the beginning of this talk, is I was really bad at what solutions I should be selling to our media clients. I mean, I didn't even know what IAV was, like an IAV unit, and I didn't know what an insertion order was. I didn't know any of these things. But I had spent, at that point, 8 years being an entrepreneur and going talking to people and understanding what their problems were. And so I was able to have a really good conversation around what the problems were inside VMware, and then we were able to develop something together. What I think is magical about entrepreneurship is, one done well, if you can get your teams good at hearing customers' problems, right, you actually have this huge advantage, which is you actually also know what you can and can't do, right? Like, I kind of knew what exchanges were, but I didn't really the whole time I ran Read Write Web. I'm sure we could have made more money if we'd done that. Maybe I could have that may have been a bigger outcome for me, right? We didn't have cool CRM tools like Matrix. Like, we had spreadsheets, and And believe me, there are many, many days where I wish we had a real CRM system, right? So you guys have all these things going for you. So if you can add that entrepreneurial mindset to what you're doing, like the results can be absolutely magical.
So I'm curious on this quote though. Do you think there is a difference between B2C versus B2B? So the reason I ask that is I think that if you release in a B2B world too early, that you're embarrassed. Sometimes that is very, very, very hard to overcome, where in the C world, your world is so much bigger that, you know.
Yeah, so the question is this different in a B2B world versus in a B2C world? So the answer is no, but let me unpack that a little bit more, because I know exactly what you're saying, and I think I agree with the higher point that you're making. But I think the problem is that when Reed says launch, he means something different. And when I say launch, I mean something different than I think what you hear, right? So to me, launch isn't always even launching a product, right? Launching can be launching a paper prototype, right? Launching can be doing an interview. And in fact, we'll get to this in just a minute, but I think the real art of doing this is to get really good at iteratively having these conversations with people. So it's not that you ever really have a launch event, right? Instead, what you have is a bunch of conversations that eventually start to have so much momentum behind them that you're like, hey, what do you know, we launched, right? And then there's a different series of questions that you have to ask yourself, which is like, okay, now this thing is out there, how do we accelerate the growth? Which I won't spend a ton of time on today, but the books that they gave you, the second section of the 3 sections of my book really focus on that question, like how do you accelerate your growth once you've achieved this product market fit? But like I think really the meta point that Reed's making, and I think that actually is way more obvious inside of a B2B setting, is this, right? Like bad entrepreneurs believe the following: all the important things about my business, all the important facts about my business are inside my head and my team's head, right? So remember when I started, I said, one of the things you can do to teach entrepreneurship is expose people to the difference between good and bad entrepreneurs, or successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs, right? Unsuccessful entrepreneurs believe all the important things about my business are in my head and the head of my team. Successful entrepreneurs believe the following: the relevant facts about my business exist outside of the building. So if you go to my venture office today, I have this like in a picture frame behind my desk, right? It's sort of like, you know, people go to like Successories and they buy those posters that say like courage and stuff. So mine is way nerdier. It says the facts are outside the building. But the reason I think this is so important, because I'll sit down with entrepreneurs and they'll be like, well, this is true about my business, and that's true about my business, and this is true about my business. It's like, oh, cool. How many people have you talked to about that, right? Because you seem awfully committed that that's true about your business, except for that, like, you haven't talked to anybody about it. So I kind of doubt that it's this kind of fact, right? And so I think this process of launching, and I think you're right. Like if launching means go unveil it to the world, and you take one shot and you hope you're right, like the outcome there typically is what I talked about with FeedHub. Like the thing blows up on you, you're like, oh shoot, I probably should have shown it to some people. Right? But if you can kind of iteratively show it to people getting these facts, that's great. Now, typically at this point in the conversation, someone raises their hand and says like, well, what about Apple? Right? Because all of you are Steve Jobs, I get that, so I understand why that feels like a really, really relevant pushback. Or the other one people say is like, well, have you heard the Henry Ford quote? Yes, I've heard the Henry Ford quote. Well, he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster horse. 2 interesting things on that, by the way. One, and this is just kind of cool cocktail hour knowledge, Henry Ford actually never said that, which I think is kind of fascinating. Right? This quote that's been attributed to him as this great quote that's actually not true. He never said that. But 2, I actually think that even if he had asked his customers what they wanted, and he'd done a good job at asking his customers what they wanted, they wouldn't have told him a faster horse. What they would have told him is, man, I'd like a horse that I don't have to stop and feed. Or I'd like a horse that I don't have to clean up after. Or I'd like a horse that's less affected by the environment, like when it's snowing or raining, right? That's the kind of things that his customers would have told him, right? Or maybe they might even, because remember, there were cars before the Model T, they might even said like, hey, I want that thing that my rich neighbor has, that thing called a car, but I want to be able to afford it myself. You got to figure out a way to do it, right? And the thing is, customers, and this is about the facts, customers are really good at talking to you about their problems, right? Incredibly good at that. You're really good at talking to them about how to solve those problems. But you can't talk to them about their solutions until you're good at actually talking to them about their problems. And so we're going to get super tactical for the last few minutes of this, and then we'll open it up for questions. And again, I'll be what's between you and lunch. But this is a really, really advanced piece of technology that we developed at Carnegie Mellon. That's a bad joke. So let me give you a little bit of context here. So actually, I just did this lecture last night at CMU with a new cohort of students. So you get to about, you get to making this point slightly different. I get there a slightly different way, but I get to making this point about customers being smarter about their problems than they are. And I'm telling you, and this was last night, there were a bunch of robotics students, masters in robotics students in the room. Like, they start to get super uncomfortable. Because, like, I'm telling you guys, like, many of these students have never gotten a B in their life, and like, they're really smart, and they know they're really smart, and it's like, no, I'm smart, not the customer. I'm smart. I know what they want, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me what your hypothesis is about your business. What do you believe to be true about your customers? And we have a kind of whole way to help them document that in a provable way. And then what I want you to do this week is I want you to go out and I want you to talk in person, like face to face, to 5 potential customers. Like, go sit down with 5 potential customers for your idea, and I want you to see if they might not know some things about their problems that you don't know. And I've been teaching this kind of methodology now for about 6 years on campus, across campus. And the first couple of years I taught it, like 80% of the students would come back and they'd go, wow, that was incredible. And typically, a couple students, at least of every class, in classes kind of 40 to 50 students, a couple will say something along the lines of, I had no idea how smart customers were. And it's like, yeah, they're pretty magical people, aren't they? But then like 20% would still be in this, like, committed to like, nah, didn't tell me anything I didn't know. Nothing at all. And so I decided to sort of take my own medicine, right? So if I believe that the facts are outside the building, right? And the reality is that my students are my customer in the context of being a professor, right? This is a novel concept in higher ed, but one that I'm pretty committed to. So I thought, like, I'm going to actually follow them doing these interviews. And I realized that there was a difference between the 80% who thought it was amazing and the 20% who said, no, I didn't learn anything. And the difference could be summarized as follows. The 80% that thought it was interesting actually did an interview. And the 20% who didn't learn anything from it thought they were doing an interview, but basically asked a bunch of questions where the only response was, yeah, that seems relevant to me. So let me give you an example, right? If you're like a robotics student, you sit down with someone, you say, hey, I've been working for 6 months on this idea. I think it's going to change the world. Let me tell you about it. By that point in the conversation, the prospective customer only has one thing to say, especially if you're not asking for the order, it's just an idea, right? It's like, yeah, I guess that's good. And they would finish the interview and be like, knew it. I knew everything that customer knew. And so we came up with this, this is Carnegie Mellon, came up with this really high-tech solution. This is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And we folded it into 3 sections. So you can see the dotted line fold. Even my 6-year-old and 4-year-old could do this, right? And we wrote problem, current situation, and proposed solution on the top of the paper. And the rule for the interviewer is you actually have to fill up this third of your paper before you can go to this third. And then you have to fill up this third of your paper before you can do this. So you have to be 2/3 of the way through the interview before you get to talk about your widget. And what's amazing about that is taking the ratio from 80-20 to like 95-5, because some basically say no matter what, they're going to lead the interview, but it's been remarkable. And I talked about some of the larger companies that we worked with to try to help them be more entrepreneurial, I'm telling you, it's magical to get people going out and talking to customers where they don't lead with this, right? This large auto manufacturer parts manufacturer that I was working with, they had bought like a bunch of 3D printers, all kinds of cool gadgets for their innovation room before I showed up. And I said, hey, would you mind adding this and then the thing I'm going to show you next into the room? And like I went back a couple months ago, they're like, yeah, those 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, those are really amazing. I'm like, yeah, and they didn't cost you 10 grand either. It's amazing. So like you can go do this tomorrow with your team, right? You can get them going and doing these interviews, right? Talking to their customers about the problem before you get to it. The other thing, you can get an entire graduate degree at Carnegie Mellon on how do you talk to customers. We have this program called Human-Computer Interaction, which is all about sort of watching customers and learning from them. The problem for me is I can't have my future entrepreneurs spend another 2 years in school. And so I've learned this tool, in my opinion, is like 80% of that degree in like 2 minutes. So if you Google Empathy now, you can get one of these that has prompts in this as well. But the idea here is that it helps you build a customer persona. And in a B2B setting, what you want to do is you want to build a persona for each of the people in the stakeholder chain, right? So one for your buyer, one for your user, all that kind of stuff. You give them a name, and then you go and you answer these 6 things about each of them, right? Like, what do they think and feel? What do they see? What do they say and do? What do they hear? What's their pain? And what are they hoping for in the world, right? And as you start to figure it out, the cool thing that we've seen people do both in startups and now in these large companies is they actually do it with 2 colored pens. There's a green pen and a red pen. And the idea is the red pen are some assumptions that they have, right? They're things that like they think to be true. So it's like, oh, I believe that my customer thinks this. But then once they've talked to a bunch of customers doing interviews like this, they move it over to green. Green means go. When you actually have talked to customers and they've told you that yes, that is things that I'm dealing with. And so this is we wanted to end this with kind of a couple really pragmatic tools to kind of help you hopefully go infuse this into your company as kind of first step of the process. But these 2 tools are hopefully things you can go back with and start to work with your teams on tomorrow. What I'll say is basically all of this stuff then becomes this sort of iterative process that you go through, right? So don't think about like doing the interview and being done or building the empathy map and being done, but what you want to do is you want to kind of iterate your way through this, so it's sort of this iterative build, measure, learn cycle. And this is basically, if you read that lean startup book, this is basically the whole emphasis of the book. How do you apply kind of the scientific method to doing these experiments? And then the book that I gave you, and we didn't want to spend a bunch of time telling you, like giving you the cliff notes of the book, because you have it. If you're interested, you can read it. But the idea of the book is that it's broken down into 3 sections. The first really goes through, what are the things you know to know if you actually achieve product market fit or not. So Lean Startup does a great job giving you techniques and processes to get there. We try to give you some guardrails like, have you or have you not achieved product market fit? The second phase is then, okay, once you do, how do you accelerate your growth? And then the third phase is like, okay, once you've accelerated your growth, how do you maintain it? There is one chapter, just as I've done a bit of talking with people in the media industry, like I actually really do love spending time with folks like yourself. And so as I spent time with people like yourself at other organizations, I will tell you, one of the things that a lot of them have emailed me afterwards and said, wow, that chapter was really impactful for me, because I know you're busy, so you may not read the whole book, and that's okay. There's a chapter on what's called being data-informed, not data-driven. And I will tell you that many of people like yourself have emailed me afterwards, some that I've talked to in settings like this, some that just bought it on Amazon, and they've told me that that's been really helpful for their media organization. So if you're only going to read one chapter, that would be the chapter I would advocate you reading. And I guess with that, we'll kind of move into questions and answers, or to lunch, which I understand could be desirable for you as well. No more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Your piece of paper.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
I just want to understand. first part is, that's client focused, right? Advertiser focused, what's the client's problems? What's
Correct.
the current solution?
That's right.
And then you get into
How you can help them.
how you might have
Right. So let's use the VMware example, right? So we might spend a lot of time talking about like, well, hey, what are the KPIs for your marketing organization this year? And she's like, oh, I remember it was a guy and a girl, but they were like super committed to we gotta start delivering more marketing qualified leads. We're not getting credit for brand like we were before, all that stuff. Oh, cool. You know, talk to me more about that. And it's like, okay, that's great. So I understand now. Most important thing at VMware this year in the marketing function is delivering way more marketing qualified leads than what you were doing historically. How are you currently getting marketing qualified leads? Oh, well, we write white papers, we do videos, blah, 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 right? It's like, okay, makes sense. So you're kind of doing what my editorial team does. Yeah, but we're doing it as VMware. Okay, cool, that makes sense to me. Well, how do you actually get people to read those? It's like, we advertise them, we've Outbrain, they put them on widgets, that kind of stuff. Okay, that seems like cool. If this was 1999, that's awesome. Maybe is there a way where we can work with you to help you co-create that stuff and help you promote it, so you see how we sort of move through these steps, right? But if I just walked in and said, hey, I'm here from Read Write Web, we've got a big audience of IT decision makers. I'd love to talk to you about I don't even know the IB units still, but my rectangle that's going to be on the top of the page. I just think she might have given me some money because, we were an influential influential site. They probably would have given us some money either way. But she would have given me a lot less money than she did. And to me, the point is not to brag about that story, because believe me, I knew nothing. So most of the time, I stepped on myself through the whole process. But I think if we did anything well at Read Write Web as a sales organization, it was that we spent a lot of time being entrepreneurs, talking to customers about their problem, understanding how they were currently solving it before we got to selling our stuff. And the way that I knew that was starting to happen as we scaled our sales organization is they would call me for advice about things that there was no way I could solve for them. I remember Microsoft calling me for advice about solving something that was completely unrelated to our business, and I was like, wow, they actually view me as a partner at that point. And in the first two startups as well, I think in each of the businesses when I got into them, I knew nothing about the business, and by the time I was done, our clients treated us as kind of trusted advisors, partners. And I think if you think about this multi-step sort of making your organization more entrepreneurial, the first step for your sales team, I think, is how can you kind of lead with empathy so that you're actually a partner, not an order taker from them.